In 1918, Henry Ford picks up a telephone and calls an unknown toolmaker in Wisconsin. Ford's assembly lines are producing automobiles at a scale no factory in history has achieved. His workers are being destroyed by their own tools. The standard portable drill weighs 10 pounds. It requires 2 hands and a chest brace to operate. A man drilling holes into automobile frames for 8 hours is exhausted by noon. Ford needs a drill a man can hold in one hand. The toolmaker's name is A.H. Peterson. He accepts the commission. Now here's what those facts mean together. The company Henry Ford commissioned would be destroyed by fire within 5 years. The inventor would walk away from the ashes. His business partner would buy the ruins at auction. And what was built from those ruins would become the tool that the United States Navy used to shape its own portable tool specifications, and the brand whose name replaced the generic term for an entire category of tool. You would assume that a company commissioned by the most powerful industrialist in American history would have a smooth path to dominance. Milwaukee Electric Tool Corporation was founded in the ashes of a burned factory. It survived its first years by repairing competitors' tools. It was sold 4 times to owners who treated it as something other than a tool company. And its workforce was reduced to just over 200 employees before another owner reversed the trajectory. The fire was not the end. The fire was the beginning. In a Wisconsin workshop in 1918, A.H. Peterson studies the dominant drill on the market. The Black & Decker pistol grip drill is heavy, weighing between 8 and 10 pounds. Peterson looks at the design and asks a simple question. What can be removed? He moves the trigger behind the motor. That single repositioning allows for a smaller motor housing. The smaller housing dramatically reduces the weight. He installs a compact Westinghouse series motor. The result is a 1/4-inch capacity portable electric drill weighing just 5 pounds, half the weight of anything else on the market. Light enough for one-handed operation, strong enough for industrial use. He calls it the hole shooter, not a drill. A hole shooter. Because the customer doesn't need a drill, the customer needs a hole. The name tells you exactly what the tool does. It becomes the first industrial drill in the world that can be operated with one hand. And the name reveals something deeper about the philosophy behind Milwaukee. The tool is not the product. The result is the product. A carpenter does not want a drill on his belt. He wants holes in framing lumber. A factory worker does not want a motor assembly in his hand. He wants a fastener driven in 3 seconds instead of 30. The hole shooter represents an entire philosophy of tool design. Build for the outcome, not the mechanism. 100 years later, Milwaukee would still name its tools the same way. The Sawzall, the Hole Hog. The tools are named for what they do, not for what they are. In 1922, Peterson partners with Albert F. Siebert. Together, they form the A.H. Peterson Company. One product, one factory, one mission. Then, 1 year later, the factory burns to the ground. Everything is gone. The machines, the inventory, the tooling, the fixtures. Arson is suspected, charges are never filed, the cause is never officially determined. Peterson looks at the ashes and makes a decision. He walks away. He does not rebuild. He does not start over. The man who accepted Henry Ford's commission and built the first one-handed industrial drill in the world is done. Siebert makes a different decision. He buys what remains at auction, the name, the patent, the hole shooter design. Whatever survived the fire. In 1924, he gives the company a new name, Milwaukee Electric Tool Corporation, named for the city where it was born. Not for some grand ambition, just Milwaukee, Wisconsin. A factory town, a working town. In its first years, the company has almost nothing. A patent and a product design, but no factory, no inventory, and no large workforce. So Siebert survives the only way he can, by repairing other companies' tools. Drills with burned-out motors, competitors with stripped gears. Construction crews, factory foremen, and maintenance workers bring their damaged equipment into Milwaukee's repair shop. The repair work keeps the lights on, but it does something more valuable than generate income. Every tool that comes through the shop is a lesson. Milwaukee's engineers take apart competitors' products. They see how the gears are cut. They see where bearings fail. They see which switches burn out first. They see the corners other manufacturers cut. And they see the weaknesses those shortcuts create. The repair shop becomes a laboratory, a place for understanding what the market needs and what the market is not getting. In 1930, Milwaukee receives a United States government equipment specification rating for its redesigned hole shooter. The federal government tests the tool and certifies that it meets military-grade performance standards. The United States Navy takes notice. It examines Milwaukee's manufacturing standards and decides to base its own portable tool specifications on Milwaukee's practices. Then the Second World War begins. Milwaukee's drills become part of the American war effort. Workers drill into aluminum fuselage skins, aluminum frame ribs, rivet holes that hold military aircraft together. Every hole has to be precise. A weak joint can fail in flight, and failure in flight can kill the crew. Women who had never held a power tool before, the workers who would become known as Rosie the Riveters, are trained using Milwaukee drills. The military stamps Milwaukee tools with its inspection seal, one of the few portable tool manufacturers in America to receive that designation. The war ends, military contracts wind down, but every veteran who used a Milwaukee tool in a shipyard or aircraft factory remembers the name. Milwaukee enters the post-war construction boom with credibility that advertising cannot buy. And then, in 1951, Milwaukee introduces the tool that changes everything. They call it the Sawzall. Just like the hole shooter 30 years earlier, the name tells you exactly what the tool does. Not what it is, what it does. The Sawzall is the world's first portable reciprocating saw. Its blade moves back and forth in a straight line at high speed, powered by an electric motor. The operator presses the tool against the material and pulls the trigger. It cuts through metal, wood, plastic, pipe, conduit, drywall, nails, screws, and almost anything else in its path. It is not designed for precision, it is designed for demolition, for cutting through a wall to run new plumbing, for removing cast iron pipe cemented in place for 50 years, for cutting through nails embedded in old-growth lumber during a renovation that should have started a decade earlier. The name Sawzall tells you what the tool does. It saws all, and that name becomes something much bigger than a product. Tradespeople across America stop asking for a reciprocating saw. They ask for a Sawzall. The brand name begins replacing the generic term. When the name of a tool becomes part of the language of the people who use it, the company has achieved something no marketing budget can manufacture. Milwaukee achieved it by building a tool so precisely designed for its purpose that its name became shorthand for the entire category. Through the 1960s and 1970s, Milwaukee continues to build. There is the right-angle drill for plumbers and electricians working inside wall cavities too narrow for a conventional drill. Then comes the whole hog, a drill designed specifically for boring large holes through construction framing. It becomes famous for its torque. Apprentices who don't brace properly can be spun around on ladders. Professionals learn to respect it. They don't replace it. Then comes 1975, and Milwaukee is sold to Amstar Corporation. Amstar's primary business is Domino Sugar. The theory is simple. A diversified portfolio of unrelated businesses should provide stability through market cycles. If one industry struggles, another can compensate. On paper, the strategy looks elegant, but a sugar company does not necessarily understand how to invest in power tool engineering. Milwaukee becomes one line item inside a portfolio of line items. In 1986, Merrill Lynch Capital Partners acquires Milwaukee from Amstar. The new logic is different. Buy with borrowed money. Reduce costs. Increase short-term margins. Sell within a few years. Research and development budgets are no longer evaluated primarily by what they might produce in 10 years. They are evaluated by what they cost this quarter. Then, in 1995, Atlas Copco, a Swedish industrial conglomerate, buys Milwaukee. This time, the owner is at least an industrial company. But Milwaukee is now one brand inside a large portfolio, competing for investment dollars against the priorities of the rest of the group. 3 owners, 30 years, a sugar company, an investment firm, a Swedish industrial conglomerate. Milwaukee's workforce in Wisconsin falls from thousands of employees to just over 200. The brand survives, but the company behind it is hollowed out. And this is where the story becomes more complicated. Some experienced tradespeople argue that the Milwaukee tool of today is not the Milwaukee tool of decades ago. The red color is the same, the name is the same. The Sawzall is still called a Sawzall. But they argue that something about the engineering is different, the tolerances, the durability, the feeling of a tool that has been running hard for years. That is ultimately something the person holding the tool has to judge. But the numbers tell another part of the story. More than one new patent per week. 11.9% sales growth in the first half of 2025. And a Wisconsin workforce that grew from roughly 200 people to nearly 4,000. Whether those numbers represent a complete return to the engineering culture of Milwaukee's past, or simply an extraordinarily successful modern business model, is a question the people using the tools will continue to debate. But in 2005, something changed. Tektronix Industries, a Hong Kong-based multinational, purchased Milwaukee for $626 million. For anyone who had watched the company pass from Amstar to Merrill Lynch to Atlas Copco, another acquisition could have looked like the final chapter. Instead, it became a reversal. TTI invested aggressively in Milwaukee's engineering. Research and development spending increased. The rate of patent generation accelerated to more than one new patent per week. The Brookfield facility, hollowed out under previous owners, was transformed into a global research and development center. Then came the M18 platform, an 18-volt lithium-ion battery system capable of powering an expanding ecosystem of cordless tools. The strategy was deliberate: create a platform, build more tools around it, and make every additional purchase more valuable because it works with batteries the customer already owns. The switching cost is no longer just the tool, it is the ecosystem built around it. Then came pack-out, interlocking, stackable, weatherproof tool storage. The same logic applied to something beyond the tools themselves. Every additional component makes the entire system more useful and makes switching to another ecosystem more expensive. The results were dramatic. Employment in Wisconsin rebounded from roughly 200 workers in 2008 to nearly 4,000 by the 2020s. Revenue grew from approximately $500 million in the early 2000s to multiple billions. By 2024, Milwaukee had become TTI's flagship brand and its largest contributor to the parent company's $14.6 billion in annual revenue. In the first half of 2025, Milwaukee achieved sales growth of 11.9%. But there is still a tension underneath that success. The same pressure that weakened Milwaukee under Amstar, Merrill Lynch, and Atlas Copco still exists under any external owner. Revenue has to grow, margins have to expand, shareholders have to be satisfied. The difference so far is how that pressure has been answered. Previous owners often responded by extracting value. TTI responded by investing. But investment is always a choice, and every company dependent on an external owner lives with the same question. When pressure arrives, will the owner invest in what made the company valuable, or extract what remains? The Milwaukee story is not really a story about tools. It is a story about what happens when the people who own a company stop understanding what it actually builds. Peterson built the hole shooter because Henry Ford needed a hole. Siebert rebuilt Milwaukee because he understood that a burned factory was not necessarily the end of a company. The engineers who created the Sawzall and the Whole Hog built tools whose names became part of the language of the trades. Then 3 owners spent 30 years proving that a company can be hollowed out without immediately destroying the brand. And another owner proved that the brand was still worth rebuilding, from 200 people to nearly 4,000. The fire that destroyed the original factory in 1923 was supposed to be the end. Peterson believed it was. He was wrong. Henry Ford made a phone call in 1918. A factory burned in 1923. The inventor walked away. His partner bought the ashes. The company that rose from those ashes was certified by the United States Navy, used by Rosie the Riveters, and invented a tool whose name replaced the generic word for an entire category of work. It was then sold repeatedly to owners who did not understand what made it valuable, and eventually rebuilt by one who chose to invest again. The fire was not the end. The fire was the beginning. Everything Milwaukee became started because a man named Siebert bought the ashes and decided the story wasn't over.